The Texans Cinderella story continues as they pound the dog pound in Houston. We're going to talk about that and more on this edition of the Bullpen.
To throw the punches away. He floats one wide open, and there he goes. Tagged down for a Texan touchdown.
Well, hello and welcome to the Bullpen. I'm James Roy. With me is Tom Chavarria, my trusty co-host. How are you doing today, Tom?
I am to the moon and back, sir. There's a hype that I can't stop. Like I woke up and just after the game, just ready to go watch another game, ready to go watch more football. I can't say how I feel because I feel so good.
It's a shame they make us wait a whole week to see another game. In the age of Netflix and streaming, I'm just so used to, okay, next one. I'm ready. I'm ready to see how this story ends, but I gotta wait. It takes some patience. I'm ecstatic, man. It went better than I could have ever expected. For those of you who follow me on Twitter, you may or may not know, I had a bet going with my direct supervisor at work on who was going to do better between these two teams. And so since the Texans won, I get to pick a jersey of my choosing, and he has to buy it for me. I'm thinking CJ Stroud. I'm torn between battle red or, deep steel blue. We're going to find out and figure that out. Tom, what do you think?
Battle red, number 7, no question. Ship it.
That's right. I'm going to have to tell him that. I think that the deep steel blue being the home jerseys is just such a classic to me. And since it's the last year the Texans are wearing this uniform, that's where I would lean towards personally. But I also really like the battle red. I only had one battle red jersey in my time. It was an Andre Johnson jersey. But yeah, super stoked about that. But let's talk about it. The Texans are playing in the divisional round. It's nothing new for the Texans. They've done that in the past, but something feels different about this year. And that something, I can name it right now, is CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud is the quarterback, and entering this stage of the playoffs with an elite quarterback playing under center feels a little different than what has happened in the Texans' past. What are you thinking about this round? What do you think was the difference outside of CJ Stroud in this Texans matchup with the Browns?
I feel like you have to look directly at that defense. The defense was phenomenal. I think the pass rush was phenomenal. Obviously, the secondary, night and day difference between the game, Christmas Eve to yesterday. Derek Stingley Jr., you can't say enough about Derek Stingley Jr. The beginning of the season, a lot of people were out on this guy, thought he was a bust, thought he was not worth the number 3 pick. And not only did he prove all season long that he was more than worth what they used to draft him, but then he took Amari Cooper, a guy that had went for 267 yards or something like that, and held him to a goose egg. I mean, it was absolutely amazing to see this defense do what I think DeMeco Ryans set out to do from the beginning. I think this was the evolution of what he wanted his defense to look like. The pick 6 by Christian Harris, I mean, he talked about it in his post game. He thought they had that 2 weeks prior. They've been working on that. They've been coaching Christian Harris up to have a game like this, and he was phenomenal. I mean, I could sit here and talk about CJ Stroud. I could talk about Nico Collins. I could talk about Dalton Schultz. There's so many talking points on the offense side of the ball. The offense side of the ball had a great day, but I think you have to start with this defense because this defense took a team that had been red hot, rolling, scoring points left and right, and shut them down.
Yeah, and I agree that there's a lot of talking points, and we will try our best to get to all of them today because there's so many positive things to talk about. Now, I will say the nickname Harris County got thrown around, and I think he really, throughout the season, has earned that nickname. That's just such a cool nickname to have, and you have to be like a really, I think, truly huge contributor to a defense to literally have your nickname be the county that your team plays in. And so I liked the defensive side of the ball. Looking to the offensive side of the ball, it's hard for me to have any doubts that Nico Collins is the wide receiver 1. And I thought it was kind of disrespectful in the intros in the game. They have all the players do their lunch. CJ Stroud, the Ohio State They went through all the players and they introduced Robert Woods before Nico Collins. And I think it just shows that the national media is just not really super familiar with the Texans game, because I think they thought that, Robert Woods is the veteran and he's probably what, I don't know. I have trouble believing that they actually thought that, but it was interesting to see that. Nico Collins had a game, and I think that a lot of people discounted his availability as being a factor in this. They were like, "Yeah, sure, CJ kind of moves the needle, but Nico, does he really?" I think that combined, they just really made a huge difference on the offensive side of the ball. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. When you look at what Nico Collins does to that offense, it just makes him so much more dynamic. It opens up passing lanes for Dalton Schultz, for Brevin Jordan, for Singletary underneath, for John Mechie on the other side, or Hutchinson or Woods. All of these guys are better because Nico Collins commands the respect that he commands. And when they don't double him, when they don't play him the way they should, he burns them for deep plays. I mean, he started the game right away with a deep shot, and that's the kind of wide receiver deep threat that you need on a team. And when the Texans don't have Nico Collins, you see it. Their offense lacks that punch. It lacks that explosiveness. And I mean, the two games between the Browns really tell you how much, in my opinion, these players, these starters on the offensive side of the ball matter to the Houston Texans. When you take CJ Stroud out of this offense, it's not the same. I mean, that's easy to say, but I mean, it's really, really different. That Cleveland Brown team looked really good with Deshaun Watson or Joe Flacco behind center. I mean, they had a great run game, great offensive weapons, and they looked very good. When you take CJ Stroud away, when you take Nico Collins away, the Texans aren't able to replace those guys. And it just proved it in this game, how big they were.
And that's really what I'm getting at when I talk about like elite quarterback play. It's just such a huge thing. Also, take note that when Noah Brown went down early in this game, having Nico Collins there created the ability for guys that we've been waiting on all season to step up to have games. Both they didn't have like outstanding like one man show games, but Xavier Hutchinson had 2 receptions. Mechie had 2 actually really key receptions, both for first downs, both incredible. Although he bobbled one of them, I was a little nervous there, but I just can't understate how important Nico Collins is in terms of how he stretches the field and gives other receivers the opportunity to show up for CJ. So I think, like I said, to this point, a lot of people maybe discounted what Nico was and accredited his progress and what he does to CJ. I would argue that Nico has stepped into just as important of a role as CJ, maybe like I'd say a step down, obviously. Being a quarterback is and always will be the most important position on the field. But speaking to the other receivers in the room, including tight ends, we'll go with the tight ends had a great game in theory. We saw 2 touchdowns, a 76-yard touchdown to Brevin Jordan, and a nice little, I want to say 30 or 40-yard bomb to Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz had a drop early on, and aside from that touchdown, he was pretty non-existent. I think based on his body of work, though, I'm still pretty high on getting him back next season at the right price. Brevin Jordan, though, continues to show out. What do you make of the tight ends in this game and their contribution?
I think it can't be understated. Obviously, the big play that Dalton Schultz had early on got the Texans back in the game, but the huge play by Brevin Jordan, I don't think anybody on either side expected him to do that. To be able to put his foot in the ground, make a cut, and then absolutely run away from defenders. I hope that both these guys are back next year. I don't know what Brevin Jordan's situation is. I want to say he's towards the end of a rookie deal, something like that. But I mean, they're a perfect 1-2 combination. I think they're great together. I think both of them are willing blockers, so that makes them really attractive as far as tight ends, because you have tight ends that are just pass catchers. You have tight ends that are just blockers. But when you have guys that can do a little bit of both, I mean, you really have to account for them all the time. Whereas you see it with some teams. A guy comes on the field, he's probably in for a run play. They're probably not targeting him. But Brevin Jordan keeps getting left wide open because I think they assume he's just a pass blocking tight end. And I hope whoever the Texans play next does the exact same thing.
I have to agree with you, and I need to give credit where credit's due to Sauce Sports, who asked this question on one of their lives or in their Discord, and I saw it on Twitter. But how comfortable do you feel with the Texans tight end room if they don't re-sign Dalton Schultz, knowing what we have in Brevin Jordan and having to replace what Dalton Schultz does?
I think it becomes a necessity in the draft. I think you got to spend some draft capital. I don't know what other tight ends would be available, but I don't know that I would want to pay somebody if I'm not going to pay Dalton Schultz. Already being in the offense, already being acclimated with CJ Stroud. If you're going to go pay a free agent, you might as well pony up to whatever that's going to take to keep Dalton Schultz in town. I don't even know the draft state of the tight ends yet. We haven't got to our draft portion because we're still ingrained
It's really
in playoff
top
football.
heavy. I feel like, from what I've noticed, there's just one tight end prospect. It's that Georgia tight end whose name just eludes me right now. But outside of that, I don't know how deep this class is because I'm a firm believer, right? I'll have these conversations about like draft needs and stuff, but until the Texans are eliminated from the playoffs or are not playing real meaningful football, I will not put together a mock draft. I will not extensively give a lot of attention to what's going on in the offseason because there's still meaningful things happening for the Texans in this season right now. So why am I looking ahead to that outside of obviously the conversation of tight end need and the cap space and all that in the offseason is a fun conversation to have because I think that of all of the important free agents the Texans have coming up this next season, and understanding that the Texans cap number is huge next season, but they also have a lot of very vital players leaving. The discussion on where they save money and where they decide to move around is a fun one to have briefly, but you're not going to hear me talking about, how deep the tight end class is or how I don't only know the Georgia kid because he comes up all over my feed all the time. I haven't heard anyone talk about any other tight end prospect. And the only tight end in college that I really am tracking right now is that kid that's playing at Colorado for Prime. Because the first few games of the season, he looked really good when Shadur was throwing him the ball. But other than that, I think that the Texans could cut cost if you look at what it is presenting itself in free agency, tight end is probably the position that they might think they can most easily replace the production at a lower value. So that might be where they go, but it's yet to be seen. I haven't done any research into anything to do with that, so I'll just leave it at that. But looking at the last thing I kind of wanted to, last couple things I want to talk about with this Texans offense. Devin Singletary had quite the game. Do you feel like it was like past the run game open, or do you feel like Singletary was a vital part of getting the Texans offense going?
I absolutely believe it was a pass to get the run game open. I think that has been the recipe for success for these Texans since probably about week 3 or 4 when they decided, or maybe it was the Panthers game. There was a game in there somewhere where CJ basically came out in the post game and was like, look, we need to do this a different way. I feel like we're not attacking these teams the way we should. And I think that's what he was speaking to because since then, you've seen CJ get really hot early. You've seen them mix in a little run to try to stay balanced. But then late in games, you're seeing Singletary and even Pierce occasionally punish these teams because they've been spread out all day from being thrown at. So I really feel like Singletary was able to do his damage late. He had a couple of decent runs early in the game, but the bulk of his work was done in the second half. He scored his touchdown in the second half. So I think it's perfect. I wouldn't touch it. I love it. Obviously, you can't stay with the same script every time, but what they're doing right now really works.
Yeah, and the Texans kind of that last touchdown that Singletary got, like to that point, I appreciated what the Texans did because I've seen other teams. The rest of my family is Cowboys fans, so like I'm intimately familiar with their inability to play. And the phrase that was tossed around in my house all the time growing up was that the Cowboys are playing not to lose. And what happens is they let teams hang around late in games, and then they don't close it out, they don't seal the deal, and they end up getting sent home. That's not what happened against Green Bay. Green Bay came in and drubbed the Cowboys this year, but that's how it's been in the past. And so I appreciated that the Texans, it felt like, kept their foot on the gas pretty deep into the game. I was surprised at how early it was that they took out CJ Stroud because it felt like we were pretty deep in the game when it happened, but there was 10 whole minutes left in the game when CJ Stroud was taken out for Davis Mills. And that brings me to my next point, which is that Davis Mills and Dameon Pierce got thrown in for the last 10 minutes. It kind of felt like we were getting like a preview, of what was, and they were like, we'll use what was to get through this game because we have what is, and we want it to be ready for the next round of the playoffs. What was it like seeing Davis Mills hand the ball off to Dameon Pierce at the end of the game?
For me, it wasn't anything. I mean, this was basically protecting your starters and running out the end of the game. I don't do the whole, this is the pass regime or anything like that. I don't necessarily care. I don't believe that Dameon Pierce is done as being the starting running back for the Houston Texans. Obviously, Devin Singletary has been phenomenal, and he wants to be back here. And I think there's a way that they could make that happen. But in the event that he gets a huge, ridiculous offer from somebody that the Texans are not trying to spend their money on, I do believe they are grooming Dameon Pierce to have more of the workload. I just think that in his infancy, as you would call it, he's just not ready for it. I mean, people got to remember this is year 2. There's some wide receivers in year 2 that don't really blossom yet. I think this is a new scheme, and that eventually they get Dameon Pierce where he's more acclimated. I feel bad for Davis Mills because I don't think he ever really got the keys to an offense like this with Bobby Slowick like this. He's always playing in garbage time. I think probably the preseason next year, you'll probably see him get some serious run and maybe look really good. I don't know that he'll be a Texan long-term just because if he does look good, teams are going to come for him. I don't know that you can just stash him. I don't know that he wants to be stashed. He may want an opportunity to try to start somewhere.
I think he's ready to leave, but I mean, as someone who has, obviously we've both endured the worst times of the Texans, and I, continued to watch through that and invested, my time into the team then. So obviously as invested in those players, it was something to see watching the Texans trot them out at the end of the game. And to me, I agree with you. It wasn't really anything, but understanding the significance of those players to what the Texans did, it meant like something in that regard. But looking forward to over to the other side of the ball, the defense. Huge day for the defense. 74 tackles, 4 sacks, 2 interceptions. Just swarmed. And D'Amico in the locker room post game kind of made a joke about it. Said, "How many points did the defense put up?" It was a huge day, and those points were super meaningful because if you look at the way the score progressed, those are the death blows to the Browns. Obviously, the Texans put up another offensive touchdown, but it was kind of garbage time. They were running the ball. They were trying to sit on it. The defense is what really put the game on ice, and it's interesting to see, considering, like myself included, I sent out a tweet that was like, hey, this defense needs to figure it out early in the game, because I was like, that we were going back and forth. It seemed like it was going to be a shootout for the longest, and then the defense figured it out. What do you think was the moment where they kind of keyed in and turned it around?
I mean, there was a few key moments in the first half where I thought they righted the ship. Obviously, the Browns came down right away and scored, made it look really easy, but then they were able to get some stops. They had a couple 3-and-outs. They had the field position in their favor a couple times, and I just noticed that they were getting home with 4 men. They were able to get Flacco off the spot. Maybe not getting sacks, but they were affecting the passes that he was trying to make. And for me, that's when I knew I was like, okay, this defense has the potential to be aggressive and get stops and make plays. And it kind of just built on itself little by little by little. And the second half, they just came alive.
And the defining moment for me, like I have to call back. So the last time that the Texans won a playoff game was in January of 2020 against the Bills. And the defining moment for that game to me was when J.J. Watt got that sack that turned the momentum around for the Texans. And it was more of a subtle thing. For me, I think it's a little bit more overt. It's a little bit more obvious for me in this game. I think it was the Steven Nelson interception return for a touchdown. Because to that point, even though the score was 24-14, I still had some feeling that the Browns might turn it around and put something together. But when Flacco threw that interception, the game went from 24-14, 10-point game, 2 scores pretty within reach, to a 3-score game. Um, 31 to 14 is just that when you see a 3 in front of the number on one side of the scoreboard and a 1 in front of the number on the other side, it's always a little more debilitating. And it's just in such a mental game. I know the Browns saw that happen. Flacco's off his game. He is now a backup quarterback who is 40 years old instead of Joey. I play really good playoff football in the first round, Flacco. And so that threw him off of his game, and I don't think he ever recovered from that. Aside from the back, and we talked about it during our preview, how I personally thought a lot of people thought that Stingley should shadow Cooper, which he did, and he did really well. I had said that I think the deeper root of the issue was the pass rush, and I agree with you that throughout the game, there was a rough stretch in the first part where it seemed like Flacco was finding his rhythm, but they squashed that around that time, and the pass rush is what forced that interception. Derek Barnett got into the backfield and almost sacked Flacco, and that's what forced that errant throw. So, I mean, I think that it's just proof that like this defense wasn't just Stingley stepping up. It wasn't just Christian Harris having a day. The whole defense came together and said, "Hey, look, we really want to win this game. Let's figure out how to do that together." And they worked together to make it happen. So to me, is the interception. And I feel like that play, as it stands, really shows what the team did to turn the game around, which was figure out how to mesh and work in a way that made the Browns offense just unable to function. And so speaking to Christian Harris had a sack, and he also had his own interception return for a touchdown. He is the first player since J.J. Watt to do that for the Texans. So Christian Harris at the beginning of the season, I felt like a lot of people were like, he's going to be a starter. He's going to be a star. D'Amico's going to do something with him. And I wanted to believe that so bad. And then we got the early part of the season. It felt like he kind of fell short of that expectation. And what I can appreciate about Christian Harris is that he worked back into that role throughout the season. And he showed, hey, look, and I think the defining moment for me was in the Steelers game when I think he tackled Pickens or something. And Pickens tried to complain about the roughness of the tackle. And he just kind of went and he emoted some tears at him or something like that. And I was like, wow, I like this guy. It was up there with when Ryan Stanek just cussed out the refs or the umps at that Dodgers Astros game where they cost us the game with that balk call against him. I was like, okay, I'm on board. I'm back. I was out, but now I'm back. Christian Harris needs to be the full-time starter. And he has since carved out his role. What do you make of that? What do you make of his performance today? Do you think it's sustainable? I think over time he's built to it. I think he can do it. What do you make of it?
For me, I think it's a lot about D'Amico Ryans. Obviously, they have a bond. Alabama guys, linebackers, that kind of thing. They can really speak the same language. But I feel like so much all these players are playing up to their potential because that's what D'Amico gets out of them. That's why when we talk about Kenyon Green a podcast ago, I'm not ready to quit on that guy either for the same reason that Christian Harris was kind of like, okay, we don't know what he's going to be. Maybe he'll be good, maybe not. And now I just feel like he's going to coach up anybody you sit in front of him, and they're just going to play to their potential as opposed to, the average Joe or whatever. And the crazy thing about the Harris interception, Dan Orlovsky, who's been banging the drum for the Texans for a long time, particularly about CJ Stroud, he came out and showed that play and broke it down. And it was so amazing to see that Christian Harris had a game plan. He absolutely baited this throw. So when they showed the play, and I mean, obviously I couldn't see it real time because you're watching everything, right?
Yeah.
Ball snaps, everybody moves. Christian Harris, statue. He's absolutely chilling there. Does not move. And I had to watch it him play it twice because I was like, wow, he's really not going anywhere. Flacco plants his foot in the ground to go throw, and then Harris breaks. And and he had read, they had keyed on something. You could tell he'd been coached up, and he knew exactly where the football was going. He steps in front of that, and the rest is history. And I think when you talk about all these players, the Carson Houstons, the Barnett's, the Tart probably at some point. I mean, he's made a couple plays, but all these guys they're bringing in, you're seeing them play extremely well, and other teams didn't want them. They were on the street, and it's like, well, How did the Texans get their hands on him? I really feel that a lot should be attributed to D'Amico Ryans and his ability to connect with players, to get the most out of them, and to push them to their potential.
I agree. And D'Amico got emotional. I could tell he was visibly emotional talking in his answer about Christian Harris's performance because he's invested in it. He cares about the players. I've said it before. I'll say it again. The change comes from the top down. We go from like Cal and Hannah all the way down through the organization. And every step they've made has put someone in a position to affect positive change for the Texans. Now, speaking to those waiver moves, we can talk about how D'Amico used them. And that's huge to me because last season it felt like Nick was making moves, Eno Benjamin, to name one that I can remember off the top of my head where I was like, this is a player I saw go on waivers. I thought, dang, if only Nick would claim him, the Texans could really use that player. And then I watched Lovie Smith just absolutely ignore the fact that the player even, like, I'm convinced Lovie Smith didn't know these players were on the roster when he was making roster decisions and picking who plays where, because there's no way that players that good were claimed by the Texans and then released weeks later due to lack of use. So that's huge. I think a lot of credit goes to Nick Caserio. I've never been a Nick Caserio hater, but to speak to the people that just have not exactly been huge fans of him, it's hard to believe there's anyone left in the fan base that has a problem with what Nick Caserio has done. Every draft class that he's had now has a player that has benefited the team in some way this season. And so, we look at the Brevin Jordans, and then we go through it all, Derek Stingley, and you just go down the line, and I can find a player in every draft class that has made a significant contribution to this team. So I think it's about time that we give credit to Nick Caserio. If you haven't already, I mean, I've been one to give him credit. And to speak to that, you talked about Derek Barnett. We've mentioned him briefly throughout this. What a huge pickup for this team, especially at a time I was worried that Grenard was out for the game. He ended up coming back, but Grenard goes out, and I'm literally not worried about it. Not because I don't think Grenard makes a huge impact. He was huge in this game. His presence, he made it felt, and I would be remiss to not acknowledge that Jonathan Grenard was a huge part of what the Texans did. But for him to go out for a significant amount of plays, and for me to be like, oh, well, we got Derek Barnett. Myjai Sanders wasn't exactly, I don't know, I can't say he did anything bad, but when I saw him on the field, I wasn't like, oh, thank God, at least we have him on the field. But, I mean, even he, another waiver claim the Texans made, has done a serviceable job stepping up in a position of need. So my question to you is what do you think was the most important waiver claim that Nick Caserio made this season?
I don't think you can claim or I guess rank them. I guess you could, but I feel like they've all been, like you spoke to, were so critical at different points. Des King, cut him, he's out, and they need a guy. Jimmy Ward goes down. I think they brought him in before that, but I mean, that was a guy that's made big plays for his team. I'm just more like, I don't understand how anybody can not like this guy at this point. I understand all the negative press that came about his how they acquired him. The whole, oh, that's the Patriots way, and we don't want to be the Patriots South, and all this, that.
Patriots way is a trigger word for Texans fans.
But it's so weird to me because when you see this guy, if you just close your eyes from that, if you just omit all of that, you see a guy who's more involved, who's in the tunnel, he's on the sideline, he's in the booth, he's so involved with this team. Him and D'Amico get together and they just make beautiful music. They go get all these players, they make them great. I think this is going to be a relationship that's going to be nothing but awesome. They're going to draft amazing. They're going to free agent amazing. I don't ever fear whatever Nick's going to do. In Caserio, we trust, that kind of deal. You know what I mean?
Well, I have to tell you that I feel like looking back at Patriots history, it's a known fact. I don't know anyone who's thought, wow, Bill Belichick's a really great personnel decision maker in his time in New England. But any great decision that he's made personnel-wise, I have to think that Caserio had a hand in it. And I'm not even fully sure of the timeline of Caserio's time in New England, but based on what we've seen happen in Houston so far, I have to believe that any positive move that's happened, until further notice, the New England front office thrived only when Nick Caserio had a hand in decision-making. I don't have any sources to confirm that. I just want to believe that that's the case. Just like I want to believe that that when the Texans made the trade up to the number 3 pick, that Caserio decided, and after this game, he was proven to be correct. Officially, it was he was proven to be correct a long time ago, but he traded the Texans pick instead of the Browns pick to the Cardinals next year for the number 3 overall pick. That was the one first round pick given up, and I'm convinced that he said, "I think we're going to be really good this year. You can have our pick." And the Cardinals were like, "You guys are going to be really bad next year. We want your pick." That and you look at the phone call that happened. They put that phone call, the recording of the Cardinals GM taking that phone call on NFL Network, and you can watch it if you want. But when I watched it, I got the vibe that that dude was not like, he wasn't like, well, no, they had 6 minutes to make a deal. And from the looks of it, that was the pick that was put on the table and he accepted it. Or no, you know what? He asked for that pick and Caserio didn't say, no, well, what about the Browns pick? Caserio said, oh yeah, of course. Because Caserio knew what he was doing. So yeah, I mean, I think it takes time, and the Texans organization has shown over time to be patient with people. The Kubiak patience that we got those 7 years that he coached were great at the end for a little bit, and that patience was rewarded. And so I think the Texans are being rewarded for what might have been pretty ill-advised move at the time, keeping a GM that had already had 2 coaches in 2 years on. And so I appreciate that. Looking at what the Texans have done defensively, I would be remiss if I did not mention Blake Cashman. That's another. There's like a group of players that the Texans didn't have the first time we played the Browns, and I tried to tell people. I was trying to tell my chief at work. I was like, "Hey man, like we have like here's the list of people that we have back that like we didn't have the first time." He's like, "I don't care. We're gonna pound the Texans. It's dog pound forever. Blah blah blah." And I was like, Blake Cashman is a huge get back. As a coverage linebacker, as a linebacker in general, he recreated the Brian Cushing play that Cush had that they've been using in the hype videos, where he blocks the Cleveland Browns lineman and then he comes up without his helmet on and headbutts him. As short of the helmet removed headbutt, he freaking like rolled a Cleveland Browns defensive lineman on the return of that Steven Nelson interception. And so if you didn't notice that detail when you watched it the first time, highly recommend looking it up. But what do you have to say to Blake Cashman's contribution to the Texans in this game?
He's been phenomenal. That entire linebacking core has been so good. But I mean, you can tell when each one of them's been out. Obviously, Perryman got suspended. Cashman was out. To'oto'o was out. But when these guys are whole, I just think they're so important to each other so that they have this great rotation. I mean, you see them flying all over the football field. They really are the head of the swarm snake, if you will. I think that they do so much for this defense. And I mean, yes, you could go on, but I just feel like I'm really confident in what they have. I think they're all really young, really excited for what they can do. I mean, man, I'm running out of words because we talk about these guys. I feel like week in and week out. You know what I mean? We're always talking about Harris. We're always talking about Cashman. We're always talking about Stingley. These are core pieces, and they do so much, and they're so talented. And I'm surprised Cashman was somebody that they could get their hands on. You know what I mean?
Could you have imagined the Texans linebacking core being this good going into the season? Because I remember people saying like, Blake who? This team is too young. They don't have any talent. Linebacker is going to be a huge need in next year's draft. Could you have imagined at during the offseason going, yeah, this linebacking room's probably, it's like pretty deep. Like there's a lot of depth in this linebacking room.
I thought it was going to be Denzel Perryman, Christian Harris, and question mark. I didn't know what was going to happen. I know they drafted To'oto'o, and I thought, that could be a prospect, but I didn't think he played meaningful minutes. When they went, I think they traded the Jets for Cashman. I didn't think he was going to be anything. I was like, oh, okay. That's a get, I guess, depth piece, something like that. But man, you watch these guys and they are key pieces of this defense.
No, yeah, it's incredible. Now there's one more thing I want to talk about before we kind of bring the podcast to a close. CJ Stroud has broken a lot of barriers. And I wanted to save this discussion for last because it's pretty important to me. CJ Stroud was the first quarterback since Tom Brady in 2007 to have the highest yards per game and touchdown interception ratio. And then the only other quarterback to do it outside of them too is Joe Montana in 1987. But what I want to talk to is if we look at, I only bring this up because a lot of Jaguars fans were like, wait till CJ Stroud wins a playoff game. Trevor Lawrence is our god, or whatever they were telling me, some messed up stuff that's absolutely not true because he's a fraud. But anyways, Trevor Lawrence 1-1 in the playoffs. Dak Prescott 2-5 in the playoffs. Lamar Jackson 1-3 in the playoffs. CJ Stroud 1-0 in the playoffs. With a win next week, he puts himself in a conversation that will need to be had if it happens, because I will be making sure that it happens. But what do you make of playoff wins as a metric to compare quarterbacks, and do you think that it matters? And I mean, yeah, that's really the deeper question.
For me, it's really tough. I think that in the playoffs, you need your whole team. It's hard to put all of that on a quarterback. Dak Prescott did not win today. He got lit up today, but their defense couldn't stop anything. So Dak could have went for 600 yards, and he had to score every time in order to beat that team today. Tony Romo, the former Cowboy quarterback, he was notoriously on the wrong side of history, and his stat lines would make you think that he did everything in his power.
He's the highest rated regular season quarterback in NFL history.
Exactly. And for me, when the whole team clicks, then your quarterback looks like, he's the figurehead. So naturally, he's going to look great. Do I think Lamar Jackson is going to be a lesser quarterback if for some reason his record's 1-4 after next week because CJ Stroud was able to get a win? No. I'm going to say it's their teams were better, whatever. I don't know that I want to put everything on a quarterback like that. I get why people do it. It's the sexy thing. This is the record. This says you're good. This says you're bad. But I mean, it's like saying there were no good players when Jordan won all his rings because Jordan won all the rings. I can't do that, even though their records in the playoffs were trash because Jordan won all of them. You know what I mean? Nobody won any NBA championships. And I know that's too easy for sports, but that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel for you on that. I mean, I understand people's hesitancy. There's some people that say quarterbacks are a win statistic. There's some, or wins are a quarterback statistic. There's some that say they are not. I think that with as vital as quarterbacks are to playing, I think it's reasonable to use their record in situations with context. And so with the understanding that like Lamar Jackson, 1-3 in the playoffs, lost to the Titans of all teams in the playoffs. And so what do you make of that? You would need to look deeper into who he played, what he played, what his team looked like at the time to kind of give credit to that. But at the end of the day, years from now, no one's going to be looking at what the Ravens did in those games. They're going to be looking at the fact that Lamar Jackson has insert record here in the playoffs, and they're going to use that against him because no fan can reasonably just add context to it and find it. It's about finding the statistic that makes your team look better, or allows you to trash talk another team. That's just, that is life. But I mean, I personally think it's a good barometer for a quarterback in terms of that clutch gene, because as we've seen from CJ Stroud, like I knew the Texans could win against the Browns because CJ Stroud was playing. That was all I needed to know. And that confidence comes from a place of understanding that like he has used the talent around him and has made something of it. He's played in games where that talent was less than it has been, and definitely has been in games where it was less than it was against the Browns. And so I just have trouble, believing that truly elite quarterbacks would say, "Oh, well, you can't use my playoff record against me because that's the playoffs. It's different." It's like, okay, dude, but like if you're elite, like you step up when you need to, and you get your team the dub. It would take absolutely like I said, the context around it for me is if I can look at that game and go, wow, the special teams and defense just really did not give him like any help at all. That's one thing, but like oh well, it was raining that day. It's like, okay, that's cool. It was raining when CJ lost it to the Jets. You're not seeing me like discount that loss. That Jets defense was really good. The weather was one of many factors that caused that loss, and I'm not going to like make an excuse for CJ there. But I'll get off my soapbox and stop rambling about quarterback playoff win percentages. And I'll ask you, Tom, do you have anything more to say before we bring this episode to a close?
The one thing I want to say is that no matter what happens this coming week, whoever they play or however they play, I'm immensely proud of this team. I cannot wait for the future. Obviously, we can live in the moment right now. It's great to be a Texan fan right now, but the future is so bright. For people that aren't football fans, Susie, I'm talking to you. This is like 2015 Astros all over again. You knew this team was going to be good. You knew the pieces were starting to fall into place. The young talent was starting to fit at all the key places. And I mean, Super Bowls are hard to win. You never know what's going to happen. But Sports Illustrated might put out, your 2026 Super Bowl champion Houston Texans with CJ Stroud standing under there, and they might get that thing right. Because I mean, there's not too many more teams that are better than this team, and no one is going to be in a position to improve this team like the Texans will.
The Texans are in a supremely great position to build the dynasty, if you will. They just need to keep chugging. I've said it at points on this show that it's not a rebuild, it's a reload now. The rebuild's over. That being said, that mentality from Caserio of where can I add talent, how can I make this team better, needs to persist while the resources are there to do that. But on that note, just some future programming scheduled stuff to talk about. On Tuesday, we will be having a live show with Texans County, Dylan Delgado of Texans County, the Instagram page. So show up for that. And then on Friday, we will be talking about the matchup between the Texans and insert team here. We don't know who they're playing then. So tune in on Friday. It'll be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or YouTube or wherever you watch or listen to this podcast at. But thanks for tuning into the Bullpen. I have been James Roy. You can find me at M1 Texans Fan on all social media platforms. And joining me today was Tom. You can find him at Third Coast Tom on Twitter. And that is where you can find him. So once again, thanks for listening. Stay classy, H-Town. And till next time, Vamos Texans. Thanks for tuning into The Bullpen, a Texans podcast, part of the Fans First Sports Network. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow along for more Texans talk from The Bullpen.